that. I'm sure there'll be plenty to inform and amuse us tonight. Our first speaker this evening is Professor Marian Simms. Professor Simms is the head of the School of History, Heritage and Society at Deakin University. Before that, she held the chair in politics at the University of Otago and a readership at the ANU. She's also been a visiting fellow at the Universities of London, Cambridge and Texas. Her most recent book was From the Hustings to the Harbour Views, a look at Australia's electoral history. Please welcome Professor Marian Simms.
Thank you very much, Warwick, for that kind introduction. Let me say it at the outset. I blame Alfred Deakin. In his first trip to London, he actually met Queen Victoria, and in a letter back to Australia commented that because Australia was at such a distance from England, it would always hold the monarchy in high esteem because it couldn't get close enough to see. In fact, at that stage, the unfortunate Queen was quite decrepit, hard of hearing, and generally not the kind of romantic figure of all of the early portraits and photographs that were above respectable middle-class mantelpieces in Kew and similar suburbs. He and his wife on that topic of royalty were in agreement, as they were in most things, and at the celebration after the opening of the first Commonwealth Parliament, not too far from here in Melbourne, Dame Patty apparently didn't bob to royalty. There were three members of the royal family present, and when questioned subsequently, she said firstly that she wasn't aware that they were, and then secondly she said, "I don't bob to royalty, it's all the same to me." So clearly, from a Victorian perspective and from an Alfred Deakin Research Institute, we take our leadership from the important father of federation, Alfred Deakin, who was a writer, an interpreter, and a great nationalist, that really it didn't matter. Australia wouldn't become a republic, and his wife agreed heartily. So we blame Alfred Deakin, we blame geography, taking the point from Alfred Deakin, that we're so far away that we don't brush up against royalty all that often to be irritated. So we see it through a gaze of nostalgia, no matter if that nostalgia is now mediated through the internet and other kinds of avenues. Well, how does one begin to assess such an important topic? And I have 15 or 16 minutes to give you a broad sweep of Australian political history to try and get some explanatory purchase on why we are as we are today. And it's my argument that, as in many other aspects of Australian politics, our cultures and our identity are historically determined, that the values and ideas that were articulated by the founding fathers, and indeed they mostly were founding fathers with an occasional exception, Vida Goldstein here in Victoria and Catherine Spence in South Australia. Spence actually ran for the ticket to be a convention delegate, and the convention, of course, drafted the first bill to make Australia a Commonwealth. I would also blame lawyers, and that's before I knew that one of our favourite Deputy Vice-Chancellors was present, who indeed is a lawyer. But it's always convenient to blame lawyers, and we blame them for the Constitution, because indeed most of the men, and they were all men of property and professional experience, who drafted the Constitution, and as with the early parliaments, they tended to be dominated by lawyers. I think there was one farmer, there was one person who was a manual worker, but lawyers predominated. And indeed, in terms of analyses of the nature of the Australian Constitution, most of the analyses are focused upon the legal nature of the document, rather than, say, in terms of other constitutions, such as the American Constitution, which is full of politics, full of the language of rights. That's another issue, Bill of Rights as well. Perhaps we can add that to the discussion. But our constitution is probably the most legalistic constitution of all. It was designed to be rigid, and of course there's a particular definition of rigid. It doesn't just mean that the founders were stiff-necked or the language is difficult. It means it's very, very hard to amend. Now, all of you who are great listeners to the ABC and will have heard the discussion this week about the lead up to recognising Indigenous rights within the Constitution and the move towards a discussion process and a referendum. So you can all tell me how many referenda have been successfully passed. No, we can't. Well, I will sort of won't keep you in suspense. 8 have been successfully passed, and we know that most of those constitutional amendments actually related to material interests. They related to bread and butter questions. They related to issues about inserting social welfare rights, economic powers, the states giving up powers to the Commonwealth with a view to being able to blame the Commonwealth if policy problems went wrong. The major exception to the general rule that they're all about bread and butter, they're all about material issues and giving more to the Australian people was, of course, the 1967 referendum, which involved recognising Aborigines within the Constitution. So one could say that the chances of the new proposed referendum, which Jenny Macklin is taking leadership of, probably are greater than those of the Republic for various reasons. So we have a very rigid constitution, and not only that, but the constitution is really devoted to political stability, which is why it was designed to be extremely rigid as well. And one could argue that the reason for so much rigidity, because in my view, rigidity, as well as being something that was created by lawyers, often comes out of a sense of fragility. And as somebody who's worked extensively on the political history of the period, what I find fascinating in looking at the reports on the election itself, and in terms of the media reports on parliamentary debates, it was almost as if they were the early politicians were, in a sense, saying, "Gosh, we hope it works. It's incredibly fragile. How can we devise a system that's going to deliver?" And what did they want the system to deliver? Again, I go back to Alfred Deakin and his quite crucial party platform document, which was the establishment of the National Liberal Organisation. And in the National Liberal Organisation platform, there was a list of worthy objects. I'll just read a couple of them. Duties and bounties, which is an early way of saying tariff. Preferential empire trade, so the empire comes in there, but in terms of the economy, adequate defence, pensions, conciliation and arbitration, so industrial relations has always been there. And I think that's a nice shopping list of the kind of issues that Australians or Victorians or middle-class Victorians cared about, 110 years ago. And the list is all